Hey guys, I think now you should be able to hear me. Yeah, okay, let me just tweak with my settings here, make sure everything is looking good. It might be the office internet issue. Alright, let's see. Hmm. Is this better now? Uh, I think now it should be better. I am seeing some streaming lag on my end. Uh, it might be because of the internet here. Let me check. There is something I can do. Hmm. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me tweak the settings just to make sure if there is something I can fix. Hmm. Yeah, I think it's the video is lagging probably because of network issues, so that might cause some delay. Let's see. Um, is it better now? Okay. Okay, I'm hoping now it improves. I just switch to a different connection. Let's see. I think it's better. I can see probably the video reflecting better than before. Yeah. Okay, let me see. So I think the mic volume is max. It might be just that something I can adjust. Okay, so I think now it should be max. Yeah, there might be a little bit of noise from the office itself, but hopefully this should be better now. All right. Cool. So just put a comment in case you guys see any kind of issues. But otherwise, I think this should be good to get started. So okay, all right. Let's see. So I'm going to switch to a quick sort of presentation mode and then get started. All right. Give it a second to load. Okay. So, all right. So hopefully you guys can see the presentation now. Just let me know in case you're not able to, um, and then we can get started. All right. Uh, all right. Good. Awesome. So let's start. So thank you all for joining us today. Mainly, wanted to have a sort of an open, honest discussion around what kind of opportunities exist within this field of game development, and also, um, give you guys some insight into how to even think about evaluating some of these opportunities and such. So initially, when I was, thinking about this particular session, um, predominantly what I wanted to cover was the different kind of companies that exist, the different kind of job profiles that they have, and things like that, right? But then the more I thought about the content for this hour-long webinar, um, it didn't feel like that might be the best thing to cover, because it's something that's very easily googleable, right? Like, you go to LinkedIn, you will go to Angel List, you can find out what kind of job opportunities are there in game development, and look at certain of these keywords, and that will give you a fair bit of an idea of what you need to know in order to understand that the kind of opportunities that are available, right? So instead, once I gave it some more thought, what I wanted to do was to give you some tools instead, right? And we look at what these are, so that irrespective of where you are in your career, you might be a first year BTech student, you might be somebody who has already graduated 4 years back, you might be somebody who's still in school, maybe in ninth grade, right? And are interested in thinking about game development. So since the audience that signed up for this webinar is a very broad audience, what I wanted to do was to give you guys some ways to think about where this industry is heading and how you can prepare your skill set to be aligned with the future of this industry, right? All right. So a little bit about myself before we get started. I did my bachelor's from Delhi College of Engineering. It's one of the best schools in the country for BTech. Uh, from there on, I worked with a bunch of big name companies. Moved to US, did my master's from Carnegie Mellon University. Lived in San Francisco for a while. Worked there with gaming companies like EA, DeNA, Kixeye. Then eventually moved back to India, started working with both companies based in India like Junglee Games, and a lot of the companies that are spread across. So part-time Evil was in Texas and I was in India while I was working with them. Grey Sauce is in Dubai, so I was working with them. So have been remotely working with a lot of companies as well, even when I returned back, right? So overall, I've accumulated over 10 years of experience now working with both startups and big name companies, which has thousands of employees, and across the board have a lot of diverse range of experiences, just over 10 years, spanning 10 years now. And yeah, so now since last year, I've started my own company called Outscal, and last 5 6 years since I've been since I moved back to India, I've been a lot on the hiring side of the table, where I was interviewing a lot of engineers every week, while we were growing our teams at different companies. And everywhere I faced the struggle where that we were finding people who were very passionate about this industry. They wanted to make games. They've been playing games for a long while. They had the right passion and the right attitude, but their skill set was severely lacking, especially engineers, right? So out of that need, kind of gave this idea that what I wanted to do was actually, instead of building a team of 10, maybe 15, maybe 30 engineers at one company and training them under my wing, I wanted to build something where I could train a lot more engineers and give them the right skill set and the right tools to get successful in their career. And that's where Outscale was born. So I'll talk a little bit more about what I have been doing at Outscale, why I wanted to start this company a little bit later. But let's jump right in, right? So I briefly mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit about what basically, like, I wanted to give you guys some tools to think about how to build your career up for this particular domain, right? And it's frankly, it's a very challenging domain because it's very creative industry. If you try to compare it to like, your regular software developer, web developer, or, Windows developer or whatever, gaming is one field where engineers need to be much more creative, right, to come up with how to best give the most awesome user experience that you can, work with the designers, work with the artists, and make the game really feel polished and all, right? So even though it's a very challenging industry, the demand for talent is very high. Companies are struggling every day to find talented developers, and as long as you can showcase your talent, right, the opportunities will come after you. You won't have to even go out and hunt for job opportunities. So the tool that I want to sort of explore with you guys today is this thing called reverse engineering, right? And I'm sure most of you might have heard of this name, or at least might have, heard it somewhere in some context. Maybe you're not familiar with it. But in a nutshell, what reverse engineering means is, so when we talk about normal engineering, right, we take some idea, we apply some concepts on it, and we do some engineering work, and we build a product out of it, right? Reverse engineering, as the name suggests, it's a reverse of the entire thing, right? So you start with the product or something which is the output, right, the end goal, and then reverse your way through it all the way to get to the origin of it, right? Like what is the idea behind it, and how do you sort of deconstruct a thing, right? So it's like, if I want to give you a crude example here, right? Like you can think about, say, the Amazon mobile app, right? Or the Uber mobile app. If you want to think about how they would have built it, you start with the app itself, right? You take that app as an example, and then you pick up one piece of it, right? Okay, I'm going to pick up the profile section. Then I'm going to break it down into further. All right, profile has my details, my ride account details, my money account details, payment details, and things like that. Now you've broken it down into smaller sections. Now you pick one section and break it down further till you go all the way up to the end and figure out how they would have built it, right? You're imagining how they have built it, and then probably even try to build it by yourself, right? So that's the concept behind reverse engineering. So why do we want to talk about reverse engineering today? Okay, so anytime, not just in game development, right? Anytime when you're thinking about building a career, right, or reaching an end goal, usually people are like, hey, can somebody give me advice of, I'm here right now, I want to be there, I want to be an engineer at Facebook, how do I get there, right? Instead of thinking about how do I get there, talk to somebody who's already there, or see somebody who's already there, and like try to analyze their journey in reverse, right? And we'll try to do the same thing when it comes to a career, trying to figure out what skills you need to build a career in gaming, all right? So the way we'll start is that we'll first look at companies. So what kind of companies exist in the ecosystem, right? Starting from the companies, we'll look at what kind of games that they are making, then what kind of technologies go into these games, and then come down to what are the skills that are needed, and the last topic will be like how can you acquire those skills, right? So that's typically how reverse engineering would work, right? So if we're talking about you, then you want to be a game developer at, say, Ubisoft, right? Then people would be like, hey, go learn this game engine, go learn that game engine, or build up your C++, build up your C sharp, or something like that. People will give you this random advice, right? But nobody really knows what's the best way forward. So it's always best to start in the reverse order, right? And you can apply this strategy to pretty much any thing that you can think of. So the core idea is the same. You start with the end goal, which is, hey, I want to be at XYZ company, right? Today we'll analyze a bunch of different companies at a broader scale because it's a generic thing, but you can even do this exercise that start with a list of 10 companies that you aspire to become a game developer at, right? And then deconstruct your way backwards and figure out whether the skill set that you guys come up with, right, for those 10 set of companies, are they matching the same kind of skill sets that I am mentioning about here. So let's see what kind of results, whether the things that I come up with is same versus maybe you come up with something else, and I'll be happy to chat about those as well. Okay, so first let's talk about game developers in terms of the companies that are hiring. So these are some of just the big names out there, right? I'm pretty sure everybody heard of PUBG, Zynga, Ubisoft, Supercell, EA, right? Of course, there are a lot more smaller companies out there, and it might depend on your preference as well. But I've just taken this as a small sample size to give you a context that typically, if you're thinking of being a game developer, these are the companies that you might be looking at. You might be looking at some local companies that might have offices in certain specific location like Delhi, Bangalore, something like that, right? So try and understand what kind of place or region you are in, and accordingly figure out what kind of companies that exist in that domain as well, right? And that gives you the very first point, okay? The very first starting point in your reverse engineering process, right? One thing that typically gets overlooked heavily during this step of your exercise is that, typically when I ask students that where all do you think game developers end up working, right? Like what kind of companies, these are kind of the names wants to hire game developers, right? That gets overlooked. And these aren't game companies, right? These are non-gaming companies, but they're still using the same kind of skill sets and the same tools that a typical gaming company, would need, right? So most of you might be aware that there is a lot of movement happening in the self-driving car ecosystem, right? So Uber and all the major sort of car manufacturers are working towards bringing their fleet of self-drivers, right, like self-driving cars, which are driverless. Tesla even has like self-driving trucks, right? So a lot of the companies are taking the drivers out of the equation and putting AI in its place, right, to drive these vehicles. If you think about it, how do you think these companies test these systems, right? The only way for them to test their AI, they can't practically put a AI that they've just created and put it in a truck and let it go run wild in the world, right? They have to make sure that it's safe. It needs to go through millions of kilometers of driving in like a virtual environment, and the algorithm behind the AI gets adjusted to account for a lot of these things that come out of the testing part, right? So there's this big subset of companies that are hiring game developers, and these game developers' job is to create simulations, like real world simulations, very much like how you imagine running around in a car in the GTA world, right? So you're creating real life scenarios of crowds walking around, and these are all simulations, right? So you're using the same sort of game engines that you'd use for typically building games, but the end product is not building a game, right? Even though you're using the same skill set, the same tools, the end product is building a simulation world where self-driving AI can be tested, right? Similarly, Oculus is like more of a VR company, got acquired by Facebook. So, they are hiring a lot of game developers for building content that is not just gaming, but, other kinds of content such as VR experiences, VR motion drives, things like that, right? And then I'm not sure if you guys have heard of DeepMind, but it's a AI-based company again, got acquired by Google 5-6 years back, based in London, and they are building a lot of AI-based tools, which a lot of the tech companies use. So one famous example is that currently, if you guys have an Android device which is using Android 9.0, right? There is a subsystem inside it that optimize an AI-based subsystem that optimizes the battery of the optimizes the battery life of your phone based on your personal usage behavior, right? And that thing was built by DeepMind itself, and then got absorbed into Google, into Android, and now it got shipped into version 9.0. So all of these companies and a lot more, which are not really your typical game companies, right? They're not making Candy Crush, they're not making Infinite Runner games and such, right? But they're still hiring game developers, and they're still hiring game developers, a lot of them, right? These are big companies. So when you're doing your search for the companies that you might want to work at, do keep in mind that normally a big set of companies outright get ignored just because they're not gaming companies, right? You can get a very good amount of work experience, a very good amount of industry exposure working at some of these companies as well. Okay, so keep that open mind and try to look at these often overlooked companies as well. Okay. Right. So once you have figured out the game companies, right, then the next step comes is to analyze what kind of games usually are being built nowadays and what kind of games ecosystem is available, right? So that is one thing that also uh, one second. Okay, so seems like it's lagging again. Let me see why something I can do. Streams can. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me just check if there is something I can adjust in the settings. Okay, I've tried to adjust the setting a little bit, but if the network itself is slow, so it's probably like the network speed is slow. Guessing that is causing some issues. To my hotspot or something. Give me one, guys. Yeah, okay. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Hey guys, am I audible? I think there might be a little. Hmm. Hey guys, is this audible now? Okay, I think what we can do is we can switch to Google Hangouts. Let me share a link directly with you guys so you can just join a video call there instead of actually uh, trying to figure. Let's see, can I game development webinar? All right. Let's see. Give me 1 second. I can probably just share this link and you guys can join that instead of trying to stream this over YouTube. Uh, Join meeting.